So it's lovely to see all this networking going on. I'm not sure I'm being very effective with the back row, as is my usual response as the mother of boys, to be ineffective with the back row group. But, oh, they're waving at me now. I've won them over, so that's okay. They're all paying attention. Okay, so this session is very much looking at what we can learn as dementia care research community from other perspectives. And one perspective is at an international level from the US, and the other is very much from home from a different long-term illness, and that's the Cancer Research Initiative. So without further ado, because I'm always very nervous about technology and interacting with technology, we should have our two speakers from the US appearing at some point soon, I hope. We have Jennifer Wolfe, who's an academic clinician, and will be actually organising a similar event, such as this one in the US very shortly, and also Elena Fazio, who's representing the NIA as the funder, as a dementia care research funder perspective. So I'm going to look in anticipation to my colleagues at what I now have to do to magically link. If I beam up, if I disappear like Star Trek.
Jennifer Wolfe from Johns Hopkins University. Was that the transfer of the microphone over to me?
Hello, Jennifer. Hello.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I have the great pleasure of co-presenting today with Dr. Elena Fazio from the National Institute on Aging. We are pleased to speak to the U.S. perspective. We have divided our presentation in two. I will start off by discussing the upcoming 2020 National Research Summit on Care Services and Supports for Persons with Dementia and Their Caregivers, which I have the honor of co-chairing with Dr. David Rubin from UCLA. And then I will be turning over the presentation to Dr. Fazio, who will be speaking to a variety of ongoing NIA research initiatives and activities related to dementia care and caregiving. So we have a lot of material to cover. I will just dig right in. I wanted to start by acknowledging that the 2020 summit that we are preparing to convene this March builds on a foundational set of activities that have been greatly stimulated and supported by the passage of the National Alzheimer's Project Act in 2011, which we refer to in the U.S. affectionately as NAPA. This NAPA has called for and led to a national plan related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, with input from a public-private advisory council that meets regularly and coordinates policy, practice, and research initiatives as a part of this national plan. The purpose of the 3 triennial summits, of which the Summit on Dementia Care Services and Supports is one, are interwoven and tied to NAPA. The intent of these summits are to develop research recommendations by presenting the state of the science and highlighting promising findings, by identifying gaps in research, and by gathering input on future research priorities from the community. As shown in the pyramid on the right, the summits, the process is that summits lead to research recommendations, which are used by the National Institute on Health to inform research implementation milestones, which are available publicly on the website that's listed on this slide. These milestones are used by the NIH to track progress towards research implementation goals. They are also used to develop new funding opportunities and to identify opportunities for public-private partnerships, as well as other activities that advance national research goals. So as I mentioned, there are 3 triennial summits. The 2020 Dementia Care Services and Support Summit complements and is coordinated with these other 2 research summits that collectively respond to the national plan. The first is the Alzheimer's Disease Summits, which have been convened 3 times since 2012, and these have a neuroscience perspective and are focused on treatment and prevention. The second is the Alzheimer's Disease and Related Dementia Summits, which are focused more on the on the related dementias. These are led by the National Institute on Neurological Sciences and Stroke, and have been convened 3 times and will next be convened in 2022. And the Dementia Care, Caregiving, and Services Summit was first convened in 2017, and we are preparing, as I mentioned, for the 2020 summit. So the goal of the 2020 summit is to, as I mentioned, highlight progress that has been made since and as a result of the 2017 summit. And the anticipated outcome are research recommendations that can be used by federal agencies as well as private foundations and private sector organizations to advance research related to the topic area of the summit. A critical element of the planning for the summit has been ensuring that we are listening and incorporating diverse stakeholder perspectives, and we've done this in a variety of ways, including ensuring that we are, by having a request for information that's publicly announced in the NIH Guide. We've convened a diverse steering committee. We have elicited the input of 5 stakeholder groups coordinated through the federal agency, the Assistant Secretary of Planning and Evaluation. These include persons with dementia, family caregivers, service providers, workforce, and payers. We've elicited input from federal partners, from the NAPA Advisory Council that I just mentioned, and we are also will be actively eliciting audience participation and engagement throughout the summit, as well as in the presentations, in ensuring that the voices of people living with dementia and their caregivers are heard, and that audience participation is also maximized. As I mentioned, the Summit Steering Committee reflects diverse perspectives. We have 6 research themes that have co-leaders. Each of the themes is matched with a researcher and a leader from outside academia who's an expert in policy or practice. The committee also includes people living with dementia and caregivers. We have representation from the co-chair of the NAPA Advisory Council. And I also want to call out Katie Maslow, who's on the steering committee, who co-chaired the 2017 summit with Dr. Laura Gitlin, and Katie has been coordinating the effort of the 5 stakeholder groups leading into the 2020 summit. I mentioned the 6 2020 summit themes that are listed here on the slide. Additional information about the topics that are included within these themes is listed on the dementia, on the summit website. 3.5 of the themes focus on the experiences and the impacts of dementia on people living with the disease and their caregivers, including their experiences related to long-term services and supports, and the medical system. We have also included an integration theme, recognizing that too often the care that we deliver is siloed between these 2 long-term care and medical systems, and that we can do better, and that we can think about how to do research to advance work in this area. The second 3 themes are focused on the process of research, and these include thinking about how to engage people with dementia and caregivers in research. One of the themes is focused on implementation science and the process of ensuring that evidence-based models are moved into the world and adopted. And the final theme focuses on research infrastructure. And again, these additional information about these themes is on the website. There also are a number of cross-cutting themes that flow throughout the summit, including ensuring that perspectives of people with dementia and caregivers are included, health disparities, ethics, technologies, and etiologies, and we have one session towards at the end of the second day that is focused on emerging topics, including issues related to technology and etiologies. I also want to mention that we have included a poster session with two types of posters, an informational poster that provides information about resources the community of researchers should be aware of, as well as research posters with an emphasis on junior investigators and ensuring that we're providing opportunities for networking with senior investigators in the field. The process for producing the research recommendations has largely been through the themes and has included, there's been attention to the recommendations that have been produced by each of the 5 stakeholder groups that I previously mentioned. The preliminary recommendations that come out of each of these themes, where each of these themes are allowed 10 initial recommendations that will be unveiled at the summit live for those who are in the audience or participating live through live stream. And I just want to finish by making a plug that the registration process for the Dementia Care Summit is now live, and that you can learn more and register more about and register for the summit at this website. And I'm going to stop here and turn over the presentation to Dr. Fazio, who may provide additional information about the summit before moving into her section of the presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. As you mentioned, the registration for the summit is live, and we anticipate the agenda will be available to all of you in a week. I'm going to move now to talk about some other opportunities related to dementia care and caregiving research. You'll see here on screen that we at the National Institute on Aging cover many topics related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, with particular emphasis on dementia care and caregiving research. We just heard about this top bullet here, the summit that's forthcoming in March. I'm going to talk a bit about an evidence review related to care interventions in just a bit. I'll also touch on our Roybal Centers for Translational Research, our Impact Collaboratory, a prize that was put forward for those who were helping us advance knowledge in dementia care, and a couple of other relevant funding opportunities. We have something that we refer to as the AHRQ National Academy Study on Dementia Care and Caregiving Interventions. It's a two-phased approach that we've used in the past for the important review of interventions. The first part is conducted by our Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. It's a federal agency within the U.S. federal government. They will continue to put forth a review of current evidence related to dementia care and caregiving interventions. After they go through that rigorous process, they will then turn to a committee formed by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. They have asked an expert panel to provide input on study questions and design, and that particular group will also have a workshop and a report that comes out based on this overall effort. So the status is such that that first phase is well underway, and the initial release of a draft review will happen at the summit that we mentioned on March 24th or thereabouts. And then the National Academies Committee will, in fact, go forward with a workshop on April 15th to move towards a final report of this broad effort. We have a wonderful group of people who are committed to the work for phase 1 at the AHRQ. We have Dr. Mary Butler and Joseph Gogler, and then we have a larger committee comprised of those expert in topics such as health policy, neurology, demography, social work, medical ethics, et cetera, and we thank them for their investment in this important effort. I wanted to also mention that one of the ways that we investigate and commit to research on dementia care and caregiving interventions is through a couple of our funding opportunity announcements and one of our centers. We have what we refer to as Alzheimer's disease Roybal translational centers that really serve as an incubator space for pilot projects in the dementia care and caregiving intervention area. We've listed here a request for funding opportunities that allows investigators to conduct early-stage research to help adapt and modify interventions for real-world implementation. And then the hope is that these particular interventions may feed into the Roybal Center Translational Program. Some of you may have heard of what is a newly formed research collaboratory. The National Institute on Aging has its own impact collaboratory addressing dementia care. This particular effort is really set forward to spur innovation in dementia care, engage stakeholders, among other things. The real imperative of the collaboratory is to serve as a launch pad to prepare already well-developed interventions for pragmatic trials within healthcare systems. So here is a large visual of such healthcare system, and embedded in that would be different cores or focus areas that the collaboratory brings to bear, including a core that focuses on pilot studies, another, for example, that focuses on training. And this is all within the context or consideration of health equity and thinking from the beginning about dissemination and implementation. So pragmatic trials are an important potential step forward in terms of dementia care and caregiving interventions, and the hope is that these embedded trials may serve the research community and broader community with greater efficiency. I'd like to mention a challenge or a prize that we had through the National Institute on Aging. Its goal was to reward and spur the development of technology solutions to help with dementia care coordination, and we've presented prizes to 3 organizations that, for example, created mobile apps to help prompt behavior for those living with dementia. And I'm happy to share more about that later if helpful. Here on screen, you'll note some of our funding opportunity announcements. Most of the dementia care and caregiving research that we fund at the National Institute on Aging comes to us through that top notice to specific high priority research areas, and there are other ways and other opportunities, including those related to small business technology entities that can apply for dementia care and caregiving research funding. I'd also just briefly like to mention a workshop that we had that's on a smaller scale than the summit that Dr. Wolf mentioned some time ago, that really focused on the next generation of innovation in terms of interventions for those with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. There was a focus on the populations and outcomes targeted in these interventions, as well as setting. Here at the National Institute on Aging, whenever we have such a workshop, there's a meeting report available to the public. One final area of interest, perhaps, we have commissioned the National Academies of Sciences. This is a different endeavor than the one I mentioned about the evidence review, to look at something that we refer to as a decadal survey of all of behavioral and social science research on Alzheimer's disease. The idea is to actually go ahead and set forth a 10-year agenda for research across all of the behavioral and social sciences in terms of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. The dementia care and caregiving research areas are included in this overall effort and are really quite critical. And I'll end there with just, again, a recognition and a thank you for the vast group of people who are engaged in that particular effort. They come to us, again, from disparities backgrounds, psychology, epidemiology, health service research and beyond, and we're grateful for their efforts. So I'll stop there and just say thank you so much for allowing us to present to your group.
Jennifer and Elena, is it okay if we take a few questions while you're still on the line?
Sure, absolutely.
Is that okay? Okay. Time for a few questions. Please raise your hand and say who you are and where you're from. And okay, we have one question.
Hugh McKenna, Alzheimer's Society. It used to be that it was difficult to get NIH funding from outside the US. Is that still the case for some of the initiatives that you've just described? Or if it is possible to get access to that funding from outside the US, does the PI have to be based in the US?
We would like to encourage those outside of the U.S. to, yes, go ahead and apply for NIH funding. It can depend upon the actual situation at hand. It could be the case that we would really encourage you to work with a U.S. collaborator, but there are certain circumstances where that's not necessarily always the case. So I would encourage you to reach out to me or any of my colleagues to think about the specific and unique situation that you're considering, but we do fund a number of investigators in other countries, and we fund quite a bit of work that's international, and particularly within the Alzheimer's and related dementia realm. We are doing a lot of work throughout the world, or I should say supporting work throughout the world in terms of thinking about how we measure, for example, dementia and the like. So please do reach out and consider seeking funding.
Any other questions? No, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Can I just ask you, as chair, it's really impressive to see you having this rolling programme of the different summits. How have you enabled the sort of continuity and follow-on? Because this is obviously our first one today. What do you think's helped with that, with enabling that initiative to continue, or those initiatives?
Elena, do you want to take that?
Sure. So I would say the first thing that comes to mind is really buy-in across all levels of our organization, our most senior leadership, down to myself and others who work as in our programmatic divisions, making sure that there is a commitment and an interest in having a summit each year. That is, perhaps to your point, a relatively new decision. It was only within the past year that there was a commitment to say we will in fact have one of these summits each year moving forward, and the Dementia Care and Caregiving Summit was the last to come on board. And so I think of it as a commitment across our leadership and all of our staff, and also I would say that the primary push and interest from the outset was coming from the advocacy community and the broader research community in formation of the National Alzheimer's Project Act. So the current NAPA Council and all those who made that legislation possible, they were really the ones who initiated the summit process, and over time I think there's been some nice buy-in and interest in really maintaining momentum that makes it predictable for the research and advocacy community to see a summit each year. So it's the sort of the founding fathers and mothers of NAPA, as well as continued interest and commitment of our leadership here at NIA.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for your time, and we'll say goodbye to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, our next speaker is Ian Lewis, who's coming to speak from the National Cancer Research Institute. He's just going to wind his way up. It's just like the Oscars, isn't it? You've got about 15 minutes here. Okay. There'll be a lady probably show you. Do you want to?
Where do I need to stand? Oh, yeah, thanks. Where would you like me? Where's the best? Is this the... Actually, by the podium? Do I have a pointer? Nope, fine, no worries. Okay. Okay, right, there you go. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to say, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. This has been a fabulous meeting. I'm a proper interloper. I don't work in dementia research at all, but I've learned a huge amount. There's so many parallels with what we're trying to do in cancer, and hopefully some of the things I'm going to talk about this afternoon. And I hope that this sparks some discussion and maybe some opportunities for collaboration. Thank you very much. So first of all, my name is Ian Lewis. I'm Head of Strategy and Initiatives for the National Cancer Research Institute. So first off, we're not an institute in terms of a building. We're a virtual institute, but probably more accurately, we're a partnership. So fundamentally, the NCRI is a partnership of all the major UK cancer research funders. So it's a real mix. It's a mix of the third sector, so the charities. That includes the large charities like Cancer Research UK, site-specific charities, and also some of the smaller regional charities. Also, each of the Department of Health and also each of the devolved nations. Really important that we maintain the fact that we have that UK focus, and we take that very seriously. And also to the Research Council, so the MRC and the BBSRC. So we have our own strategy. So they're up there. If you can't see them, fundamentally for me, what I always kind of say is the first three are all about collaboration, and the fourth one is about putting stuff into practice. And I'll be honest, and from the discussions on the tables and discussions yesterday, implementation is a struggle for all of us. So I think that having that discussion pan-disease is something that's really important. So probably the biggest core function that the NCRI has, the National Cancer Research Institute, is fundamentally bringing people together and providing a platform for those people to do clever things, so to work together in multidisciplinary teams to develop research ideas. The way that we do that, in the most part, on a volume scale, is through something we call the NCRI research groups. So these are 19 groups of researchers. They're all competitively recruited, and we organize them into 4 cross-cutting groups, so these are kind of more thematic, and then 15 groups that are based on either a cancer site or a natural kind of cohort of cancer types. Now, that is a big undertaking in itself, but it's actually even much bigger than that, because each of those groups has circa 3 subgroups. And each of those subgroups are really the kind of engine room of the research groups. So they're there to actually develop ideas and provide more specialist advice. So for example, if I pick the breast cancer group, the 3 subgroups for that are early phase disease, late stage disease, and then quality of life issues. And that's kind of, those themes for each work stream is decided by the main group. Now, to hammer home even further how big an undertaking this is, so there's about 80-odd groups in total, and it represents about 1,200 competitively recruited researchers across a whole range of disciplines. So this diagram, very proud of this, I literally did this one morning whilst watching Football Focus in my pajamas. Very, very therapeutic. But I just wanted to kind of hammer home that really the big thing that the NCRI does is, and I think 90% my job, is relationship management. We provide the headspace, the safe space, the honest broker role to bring people together across disciplines, across cancer types, to make things happen. And I know that with workforce pressures and with workforce pressures and financial pressures, I think our role is becoming more and more important to give people that opportunity to do that. I'm just going to call out one particular group, which is this blue group here in the corner, and that's what we call consumer members. So a lot of debate over the term consumer, and I'm happy to talk about this further in detail with any of you. But basically, this is our patient, public, and involvement members. So these are people who've been personally affected by cancer. So it's about 100 members currently. Again, also competitively recruited. So we put an ad, we interview, they're interviewed by a group of other consumers, because we actually kind of, for the roles that we're looking for, we want people who don't just bring a lived experience, but also understand patient-public involvement and how it functions. So they become almost involvement champions whenever we're talking about research in the room. So another big activity that we do is something called the Cancer Research Database. Now, all this fundamentally is that we collect all of the funding data for all of our partners. So we actually just announced the total last week to our partners, so a second grand unveil this month. But for the first time, NCRI partners between them have funded over £700 million this year in cancer research. So as you can see, it's a large, it's a big increase. We haven't corrected this for inflation, but still, a big increase over the last 15, 20 years. Now, what I will say, and again, I'm not going to go into huge details, but when you look at this by cancer type, which we do, we analyze by cancer type and topic, huge variation, as you can imagine. So whilst the headline figure is kind of good news and big sums of money, within that, if you consider there's maybe 200 types of cancer, many different subtypes, some rarer cancers, some that maybe historically haven't had huge amounts of capacity in the research workforce, then there's a much more complicated story behind those figures. And one thing that we do to illustrate that is we break all of the funding down by what we call Common Scientific Outline Code. So it's an international coding system to break up the research projects by subject. And you can see where the big increases are, right? So the big increases are in basic biology and, there you go, and treatment. But kind of hot on its heels really is early detection and earlier diagnosis. And that's largely because, well, as I'm sure you'll all know, the earlier we can generally, not always, identify and diagnose cancer, then the more successfully we can treat it. And there's been a huge interest in not just the routes to diagnosis, but also the technology, so blood tests for cancer and such. One area that has, well, two areas, I'll call it two areas. So prevention is still, in terms of cancer, still not very heavily invested in, though I will say that this is kind of cancer-specific prevention, so obviously more population health stuff might not be captured in this data. But in terms of survivorship and care research in cancer, I mean, that is, if I'm being kind, it's flat. And I'll come on to in a second kind of how we're trying to address that. So this is just to show that we can break it down even further. And probably the bit that you would call kind of pure survivorship research is probably about less than 2% of the entire cancer research funding portfolio. Same with palliative care, which is there. It's very, very minimal. It's a huge, huge topic of concern. So we have all this data, we have all these groups. How do we decide on something as massive as cancer research? It's an umbrella term for many, many different conditions and many different kind of contexts for patients. How do we pick the things that would be transformative for cancer care? The NCRI sounds terribly grand. We have all this, our partners have all this funding, but as an organization, we're only about 25 members of staff. So we actually put together a group of researchers to really say to them, what are the gaps, challenges, and opportunities in cancer that the NCRI is best placed to do? Not where we could duplicate what others do, but where we could do something that might be unique and transformative and actually push the research agenda on. So we tried to kind of put together the Avengers of cancer research. We literally just sat around and thought, who are the people we know are really good? We all know these people that would really contribute and really get what we were trying to achieve. And we invited them all. I think they all said yes. And we literally give them a blank slide that says, name a gap, name a challenge, name an opportunity. And that was the agenda. We just discussed that. It's not the most sort of fancy technique ever, but it was super effective. Because one person's gap is another person's challenge, is another person's opportunity. So we just basically focused their own minds on 3 things we should do. And actually came to quite a strong consensus quite easily, really. Some of these things in terms of the scientific will be mirrored in dementia. So data, immunology, survivorship and care, and kind of imaging and early detection, which are things we're starting to get working on soon. There's also things that are more environmental, like how do we actually maintain clinical research as a core function in the health service, and how do we support a workforce under pressure. Trainer retention, of course, which is kind of very much aligned to that in many respects. And then things about how the NCRI, how we function ourselves. So not just saying what others should do, but how do we change to meet these demands also. And then what we do then is we form strategic partnerships. So as I said, we're not a huge organization, but what we are is experts in the cancer context. And we are a really effective conduit to that cancer research community because we have so many individual personal relationships with all these people, funders, researchers, and patients. So, for example, with Health Data Research UK, huge initiative, the biggest show in town, really, in health data in the UK. They had cancers very much on their to-do list, data's on ours. So we formed a really good partnership with them now, looking at what that means for cancer. Similarly, with the British Society of Immunology, who I absolutely would recommend if anyone wants to work in immunology. It's an amazing resource of people and a great bunch to work with. Very practical, very proactive group. Again, looking at the issues in immunotherapy. It's a huge gold rush. There's lots of positive news stories, but underneath that, there's a lot of patients who don't respond and a lot of side effects and terrible late effects. And then initiatives that we run ourselves, so particularly around pathology and radiology. And the one I thought I'd pull out, bearing in mind the topic of conversation today around care, is this final one here on living with and beyond cancer. So our kind of catch-all for what's traditionally been survivorship and quality of life. So we actually worked with, just to say the reason for doing this course is that there's about 2.5 million people living with a cancer diagnosis today, but it's going to be nearer 5 million by 2040. And how do we develop those new models of care and interventions to support them now and in the future when we have that huge group of people? So we worked with the James Lind Alliance, actually gathered 3,500 questions from people affected by cancer, and from that, using their process, developed a top 10 of research priorities to try and create a critical mass around some really key areas for patients that we could really do something meaningful. So not just lots of small pilots, but actually things that would change practice. And actually, we've formed a new Living with and Beyond Cancer research group made up of 3 of our former groups to try and tackle that specifically. So as well as those specific initiatives, the core functions, we run a lot of meetings, but we run meetings with really specific purposes. We try to pick topics. So for example, we run a Living with and Beyond Cancer Research meeting on the 24th March in Birmingham, so fitting in with our objectives. And also we run the UK's biggest national cancer conference. So about between 1,200 and 1,400 people every year coming together across all disciplines to share knowledge and best practice. So just finally to say, I'd love for this to be not just a one-off event, that I just come, holiday romance, I turn up, have a lovely time and disappear. But that we keep this conversation going. I think there's so much to learn between the different diseases. So not just what we're researching, but much more about how we conduct research and how we can do that effectively. Okay, thank you very much.
Questions, please, for Ian. Oh, come on. You must have some questions. Fabulous.
Thanks.
I mean, there are a lot of similarities, as you say, but can I ask you a very sensitive question? When you're bringing all of these different organisations together at the start, they all have their own agendas and their own initiatives. What do you think? If we do something like that, what can we learn from that? What helps the process?
Yeah. So I think that there's a sort of a very slightly bland and grand statement that we make, that we coordinate the UK cancer research funding landscape, and that's far too difficult to do in reality. I think you have to, in one sense. In another, there's lots of value you can add to each organisation and to groups of organisations. So for some of our partners, they might not be interested per se in the Living with and Beyond agenda, but 5 or 6 of them are interested in the radiotherapy arena. So we bring those together separately. But then there's other issues that are broad topics that run right through cancer research, where all of them can galvanise together and act as a unified voice. So it's about adding value to each of the partners that want to join you. And then through that, you will inevitably find things where groupings of them will want to work together. And, when you work for a charity particularly, and having been there for many years, it's not always easy to have those discussions. And we do talk a lot about this being the honest broker, being the safe space to do that, particularly between kind of research teams that might not have an arena otherwise.
Okay. No questions? You've stunned them into silence.
Amazing.
One last one. How do you mentioned the areas that are being ignored, if you like, that are not naturally picked, like palliative care. How do you approach that?
Yeah.
Because people will keep on doing the things that they're good at, and the more difficult areas or the less sexy areas will get ignored.
Yeah. I think I sort of very grandly, when we launched, so when we did the James Lind Alliance, the top 10 priority setting partnership, I was really honest about that, probably too honest, in that it's great having the priority areas, but it's also about creating a bit of a movement. I do the fist whenever I do it. Because it's about getting people excited as well. People, funders are people too, and we want to get excited about an area of research, right? So it's about then communicating to different groups of researchers that this could be for you. So in the top 10, the Living with and Beyond top 10, there's one in there which I had no influence over the top 10, but I did a little air pump when it was selected, which was biological basis of side effects. I think traditionally, maybe palliative care, but certainly in terms of survivorship agenda, has been viewed just purely through a psychosocial lens, and not really taking into account some of the biological aspects of that as well. How do we reduce the incidence of side effects? What's the effect of inflammation, etc. So suddenly then you start piquing the interest of people who have these particular research subjects that they thought, oh, crikey, this might be for me. And then bringing them into the fold. And then by doing that, then you sort of start to show people that this research is sexy and exciting. And actually, then you have the opportunity to tell them the stories of the people that have asked you to do this research in the first place, which is the patients and carers.
Okay, thank you very much.